good to know you're tuned. Now, violent extremism has been described as the beliefs and actions of people who support the use of violence to achieve ideological, religious, or political goals. For some decades now, activities of different violent extremist groups have ravaged most countries of the world, with millions of people dead and many others homeless. In Nigeria, acts perpetrated by violent extremists, otherwise known as Boko Haram members, have left far reaching consequences on the nation and the environment. In our Neem Capsule, a segment which highlights soft measures for tackling terrorism in the country, we have in the studio a legal practitioner working with the Gulf of Guinea Corporation in Abuja, Mr. Abdullahi Mubarak, to speak on countering violent extremism and the rule of law in consolidating legal structures. You're welcome to our studio.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Mr. Mubarak, how does countering violent extremism relate to the rule of law, to start with?
Conflict can usually be the bellwether for the degradation of rule of law. In other words, the end result. But it can also be a cause for opportunity to rebuild legal structure and justice sector infrastructure. So it has been a cause and an effect. Violent extremism, as exemplified by what is happening in the Northeast, is generally difficult to counter while maintaining standard rules of engagement in war situation, that is minimizing casualties and collateral damage on both sides. However, it is expected the rule of law should be maintained at all times.
I would like you to expatiate more on the nexus, the relationship now between the rule of law and efforts, being made to counter violent extremism in the country.
It's generally there's lots of focus on the extreme and looking at the ideology, but we haven't spent like a considerable amount of attention looking into the causes and effects rather than the symptoms. So individuals who move towards extremism ideology, one in which they go from extreme ideas to extreme acts, usually are grieved by a sense of injustice, or usually either by the world around them or by the government institution around them. That's why they move into all these acts. And secondly, during wartime situation like what is happening in the Northeast, a lack of defined battle lines and clear extremist combatant result in surprise element, ambush and desperate response leading to a violation of rule of law.
All right, is taking to crime the solution to seeking redress for injustice?
Well, sometimes some people in their head, probably because they are brainwashed, taking to arms is probably the only way out.
In complex situations now, especially around the Northeast, where we have all this problem, how do you respond when the government and civil society groups lack the ability, so to speak, to establish the rule?
Well, in complex situations such as the Northeast, because there's a clear lack of defined site and clear fighting, forces to combat, absence of government or civil society or board. So we have to be willing as practitioners, especially those going into conflict areas, to widen our scope and the aperture of who the important actors are. Because oftentimes in one society, the government may not be present. Like in the Northeast, not everywhere the government are. So we sometimes have to engage people who we normally might not engage. For example, where towns have been overrun and we don't have the legal, infrastructure in place, there are some certain individuals within the community that are seen to have legitimacy and power and authority by the people. So they are more trusted than government officials.
Okay, quickly now, before I let go of you, what legal structures or programs do you think should be developed for extremist environment?
Generally, legal education to de-radicalize and provide alternative understanding is necessary. And then secondly, they need to strengthen administrative and legal responses to extreme tendencies, to regulate preaching, to regulate hate speech, and provide quick and less complex structure for people to come in.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Abdullahi Mubarak, for being our guest this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Mr. Mubarak is a legal practitioner with the Gulf of Guinea Corporation in Abuja. Join us next Monday for Neem Capsule, a segment which highlights soft measures for preventing terrorism in the country.